Back in the basement again today to talk IPF. So a couple weeks ago, we talked about proposed IPF rule changes. Also did a video talking about Mark Bell and his $253,000 investment into getting his equipment IPF approved. There's been some updates on both of those fronts, so I wanted to talk about it today. If you haven't seen those older videos, I'm going to link them in the description box as well as at the end of this one. Make sure you go check them out and read some of the commentary, as it's very enlightening and very interesting to hear your opinions on those things. So first, let's talk rules themselves. Far and away, the thing that got the most traction was in regards to the bench press. So there was 3 proposed rules around that. Number 1 was adding in wording into the execution of the lift that said an individual has to lie as flat as possible on the bench. Another rule asked that the feet being put on the bench in order to help you set up be eliminated, so you can no longer put your feet on the bench to set up. And lastly, your feet cannot touch under the bench. So no matter how you want to kind of spin it or paint it, all of these rules were in regards to eliminating or minimizing the amount of arch people can use in their bench. And it's been an interesting journey on the bench press because as powerlifting gets more and more publicity on social media and other streams, by far and away, the biggest area of controversy has always been some of these extreme archers, especially my friend Sean Noriega or Owen Hubbard. You see these things reposted and the comment sections are just full of people saying that this isn't a real bench press, this is cheating, lie on your back and actually do a real rep, and all these things. So it's been really interesting to see some of that feedback. It's been even more interesting to see the IPF actually kind of give into this and try to pass some of these rules. So before I get into what the rules actually passed and what didn't, what I want you to do is let me know in the comment section where you stand on this issue. Are you anti-arching, pro-arching, or are you kind of right in the middle saying it doesn't really matter to me either way? If you're really anti-arching though, what I'd really also like to hear from you is if you actually compete in powerlifting, and if you do you compete in an IPF or IPF affiliate federation? Because that's just interesting to me. From my own personal experience so far, the people that have been the biggest anti-archers are those that don't actually compete in powerlifting, which is interesting to see their commentary and be so passionate and anti-IPF and anti-arching in this case when they don't have anything to do with it. And I say that fully aware that I have a lot of commentary around the IPF, but I don't actually compete in IPF meets myself. I compete in the USAPL, which is an affiliate, which follows the rules, but most of my commentary is around the equipment, which doesn't really matter to me because I can wear whatever I want for the most part as long as it's IPF spec'd. So suck on that one, everybody. I know, fully aware. So these rules that were proposed, all 3 of them were either withdrawn or failed, which means there won't be any changes to the bench, which I'm sure are going to rustle some jimmies. So now that I said that, also expand upon your answer. If you feel that it's cheating, why do you think these rules should be in place? To be honest, I'm of the opinion of as long as it's within the rules and it's not breaking them, people will always try to do whatever is most effective and efficient in terms of moving the most weight. So for those people that are hypermobile that can get that arch in and shorten their range of motion, they're going to do that, and it's within the current rules, so that's okay. I don't believe there's a way to just slightly alter the rules as they had proposed in order to eliminate or minimize those. They'd have to drastically change the rules. Something like the squat where there is a range of motion implemented where your hip crease has to go below the top of your knee. Maybe in the bench, it's going to be something like the bottom half of your arm has to break parallel or something of that nature. It's going to get pretty specific if they do want to further investigate or look into doing that, which in all honesty, I do think they probably will at least look into it and try to amend some of those propositions from this past year. So no changes on the bench, which I think is fine because especially when you look at things like squat or bench press or deadlift, within all 3 of those disciplines, people try to do what they can to move the most weight effectively and as efficiently as possible. On the squat, that might be going for a low bar versus a high bar. On bench, that might also, in addition to arch, be your grip width or how much you tuck your elbows or do you sink when you pause it, whatever the case may be. On deadlift, it could be pulling sumo, which I'm sure I'm going to get some comments that sumo should also be eliminated. But again, people always try to be as effective and as efficient as possible within the rules. And I don't think bench and arching is any different to any of that. Now, on the brighter side, there are some other rules that I found were very interesting and probably won't rustle that many jimmies, because in this case, we're talking specifically about your jimmy, and you no longer only have to wear briefs when competing. So up until now, you had to wear briefs, which was a very interesting area because almost all first timers, when they went to their first meet, they didn't really take this rule seriously or know about it. And they show up, with their boxer briefs or their Under Armour, whatever it may be. and they were turned away or forced to cut their underwear and cut the legs off so they looked more like regular briefs. They've now added an addendum, or at least by picture standpoint, which looks like boxer briefs will now be allowed. However, the inseam looks to be like fairly short, so maybe an inch or two only. But I can talk from personal experience, an inch or two makes a big difference to a lot of people out there. So this is very interesting to see, and I'm sure I'm showing the picture right now of what was on the actual approved list. You can see right here there was another option to have longer leg material allowed in. This was done away with. So depending on what your thoughts are around briefs, if any of you wear jock straps, great, but you will now also be able to wear what appears to be boxer briefs, which I think is good news. So let those Jimmies have their time. Speaking of other clothing options, one of the areas that I've seen a lot of discussion around has been with t-shirts. So there has been a rule passed that has said that males now have to wear t-shirts on deadlifts. Up until recently, the rule stated that a male only had to wear a shirt for squat and bench, and when deadlifts came around, they did not have to wear a shirt. Females, on the other hand, always had to wear a shirt for squat, bench, and deadlift. Now we have gender equality, and everyone has to wear a shirt for all three lifts. And it's really surprising to see people upset by this. Again, it's never impacted me because I've always worn a shirt for deadlifts, but I don't think it hinders nor enhances your deadlift in any way, and you already have a shirt on from your other lifts already. I just don't see the point, but again, I'd be very interested to hear your feedback if you're someone who is affected by this rule change where you're really pissed off that you have to wear a shirt now for deadlifts. So those are the rule changes that I found most interesting. I will link the actual meeting notes that say which rules were proposed, which failed, which passed, which were withdrawn. I'll link that in the description box as well if you want to kind of check it out. It's not very well written and it's not very well explained, so there's some context missing, I think. So like with the underwear rule, for example, but it still is a good read if you're interested in that kind of thing. So lastly, I want to talk about equipment. I kind of talked about this a little at the beginning, but there is a whole new list of IPF approved vendors, and there's a lot of familiar faces on there. So my friends over at A7, my friends over at Stoic now have their stuff approved as well. One of the most interesting things is the people at A7 are coming out with some powerlifting belts, which are actually manufactured by Pioneer, which is another company I'm a big fan of, but they were kind of vocal in not wanting to pay the fee to have their stuff approved. But since it's going through A7, which has paid the fee, technically you can wear some Pioneer belts in competition. So I'm very glad to hear that, both for A7 because they're getting some of the best belts in the business, and for Pioneer because, again, they're getting some of their belts worn by people in the IPF. So that's very interesting to see. One of the most interesting things about this, though, isn't necessarily just the list and all the new people on there who spent money in order to be on that list, which I will try to include in the description box below. But getting back to the Mark Bell thing, where Mark Bell had all this money paid to get his stuff approved, one of the areas that we talked about in the last video was in regards to his X sleeves, because his X sleeves, which are supposed to be his, I want to say his strongest sleeve, but he has a strong sleeve too, so it gets a little confusing, but it's supposed to be his stiffest sleeve, so to say, which has a denim panel in the front, rubber grips on the inside to keep them from sliding down your leg. Those that are initially approved, and then the IPF came out and said they were actually removing their approval because it had rubber on the inside, and that's against the rules. So they gave them approval, then took it away, and then basically blamed Mark for this, even though clearly if you've ever looked at the X sleeves in general, that's one of the biggest marketing points that they have. They don't shy away from how they're made, constructed, or some of the benefits of having that. But it kind of put Mark, in my opinion, in a very rough spot because he just paid $250,000 to get all this stuff approved. You would think the IPF would vet this stuff before approving it or taking money. Didn't seem to be the case. I don't know the inner workings of the IPF, true, but it just seems really weird to me. But Mark, being the good guy he was, actually came out and said anyone that bought those X sleeves after they announced they were approved, so the original version with the rubber, that they would actually be sending you a free pair of the newer sleeves, which did not have that rubber included. So I think that was a very ballsy and awesome move on Mark's part because they didn't have to do that, but he's really doing everyone a solid who went ahead and bought those sleeves. So again, I'll include the rest of the equipment approved list because there's a lot of new companies on. There's also some potential new products from SBD and things of that nature that show up on this list, which I haven't seen announced anywhere else yet. So again, I found it interesting. But that's the basics when it comes behind the rules and the new equipment that's being released. Let me know your thoughts on this. As always, thanks so much for watching, and we'll talk to you next time.